We're really privileged today to have two CEOs who walk the walk, Tom Richards and David Nelms. And they're joined by members of their senior leadership team so that we can see right here the total commitment to diversity from both. So we're very proud that both Chris and Diane are longtime members of the Chicago Network. So kudos to you, David and Tom, for your leadership of companies that have been top performers in the Chicago Network's census, which looks at how women are doing in the top 50 public companies in the Chicago area. And a peek into your boardrooms and your C-suites reveals that you really have a diverse group of leaders, which in turn, reflects that you believe in diversity in the fullest sense of the word, and you can help drive superior financial performance and shareholder returns through that commitment. So today we're going to explore your leadership and how you've grown these strong and diverse organizations from a number of perspectives. What does effective leadership look like to you? What are some best practices to build a talent pipeline that's robust? And how do you build a culture that aligns with your commitment to your company's values? So we're going to go into all of this now. Tom and David, I know that leadership is something that you're both passionate about, obviously, and that you believe is really critical to the success of your companies. And I'm just wondering if you might start, Tom, by telling us what do you think are the most important attributes of effective leaders?
Yeah, I think, and my gang has heard me say this, I think leadership is, I would describe, the most important asset inside of a business. I've said I'll take great leaders over a great product, I'll take great leaders over a great strategy, I'll take great leaders over a lot of different things because it has a long shelf life. So it's kind of, why do I spend so much time on it? Because I believe it's that strategic. I would say at CDW, we built a leadership framework about 4 or 5 years ago. But probably the three that I think are really important is I look for people who are servant leaders, first and foremost. I think in today's world, when you're tapping into resources all outside the organization, people have to have the mindset that you kind of view yourself at the bottom of the funnel, and your job is to serve those people that work for you. And the analogy I give people, it's like being a parent. Those of us who have been parents and love our children dearly, there are times when you have to do things that hurt you, but you know what's in their best interest. So it's not just about always saying yes. The second thing is you can't be at a company like CDW and not have a performance mentality. And so I look for people who have track records of performance. We've all seen the analogy of someone who has great potential, but they don't perform. So that's the second one. I'd say the third one is do they have a continuous learning curiosity? Because if that's true about them, then you kind of have this notion that the organizations that they lead will constantly be forcing themselves to continuously improve. So those are just three of the things that when we're thinking about leadership, we focus on.
David, what about you?
So I think first there's a number of attributes that are important for an effective leader anywhere. Great communication skills, ability to motivate and lead other people, strong integrity, and obviously the appropriate experience to do whatever the job is. I also think fit with the organization is really important. And so at Discover, people that are successful, leaders who are successful, are team players, more collaborative. We have a unique culture. I think that people that really lead Discover and think about the company as opposed to in their teams as opposed to just about themselves and their own career. Think about the whole company, not just their function at the time. So I think it's important that you have not only the general leadership skills, but that it fits, and therefore you can be effective in the culture at Discover.
So, Tom, how do you think, you mentioned your leadership framework. Yeah. How do you develop leaders?
Well, first of all, you have to be deliberate. And you have to build what I would describe a multifaceted approach. So we have things that are what I'll call generic, where we put people through exercises and experiences. For example, we just ran something for our top 120 leaders called the Leader's Edge. And what we were trying to get people to experience is how to make decisions the way a CEO makes decisions. So we put them in this 3 days of intense kind of experience, cross-functional teams, and they had to actually behave and go through a gamification process as though they were leading a company. Then you do what I would call more targeted things. things like many of the things we do for the women at CDW, whether it's sending them to programs like the Leading Women's Executive Program and sending them CEO Perspectives, and all the way down through this wonderful thing we have at CDW called ONE, which is the Women's Opportunity Network. I think it has something like 700 participants in it. So, you know, you almost have to look at it the way you would be look at anything, which is there's got to be so many different facets to it that everybody can catch on some way, and then you just make sure that you're very deliberate about it. It's a priority for us.
Chris, I think you're the executive sponsor of the Women's Network.
Yes.
How do you participate, and how does that help to build leaders in the organization?
Well, for me, as executive sponsor, it's really setting the strategy and then participating in activities, usually the main activities. And so what I try to do is exactly as Tom had said, ensure that the women who are participating understanding the underlying purpose of the Women Opportunity Network and the various nodes, we call them, or business resource groups, underneath them, and it really starts with performance. So when we talk about developing women, it's quite important that we all understand that's grounded in driving talent and ultimately business outcomes. And so when we think about the activities to actually achieve that goal, we often think about how do we partner with our partners, the folks whose technology we sell. How do we partner with our customers? Because ultimately that drives connections, that drives business outcomes, et cetera. So we really try to drive the activities around the strategy of the business as opposed to just talent development for talent development's sake.
That's terrific. Terrific to hear. David, how about you? Do you have particular programs that you do for leadership development?
We do, and I think some of the general communications, which we communicate to all employees. I get in front of all employees in the field and here so that everyone understands the strategy, the vision, the values. And then we have, obviously, the normal feedback is very important. You know, I'd like to think that we have continuous feedback, but certainly, you know, twice a year, once a year, you sort of really want to make sure that there's high quality feedback, and everyone should, I tell people that they need to be, no matter where they are in the company, they need to continuously be improving. There's things that they can individually work on, so we try to make that clear. And then we do have a whole number of programs, both internal programs that we have for networking employee groups and so on, and then we also participate in some of the programs Tom mentioned, and you know, there's some very high quality external programs that we certainly are leveraging.
Mm-hmm. And Diane, do employee networks or mentoring programs fit into the culture there?
Absolutely. So we also have, employee connection groups, resource groups. We have, our largest one is the POWER group. It's Powerful Women Impacting Results. So that is something that was started a few years ago at Discover. I was the sponsor in the early days. The good news is its transition, it just continues to grow. I think a lot like Chris, you know, the original objective was to try to figure out how to harness the power of this group and make sure that it translated into great business results. You know, sort of along the way, we figured out that's kind of hard to figure out how to do. A lot of the women in the group have since, you know, directed the activities of the group. And it's really kind of amazing to me how much women want to improve. And so a lot of the activities in that group have been sort of retooled in response to what the women have actually asked for. So they want to learn how to network, they want career advice. We have a session coming up. I think our female board members are going to come and sit down with our employee connection group, give a presentation, take questions, and really talk about their journey. To me, those are the kinds of programs that have really resonated pretty well with our employee connection group.
So clearly you don't get the numbers that you're getting and achieving year after year without planning. How does your succession planning take diversity into account?
We have a really, I think, incredibly best of class called talent review process at CDW. It's pretty pervasive. It is an annual process. It covers about 800 managers or leaders. It goes over a 3 to 5 month period where we start and we go through this notion of what's the talent review at this level. It identifies skills, it identifies areas for development, it identifies high potential people, and that kind of builds itself all the way up into and including my executive team, and then we review all that, as David knows because he's a board member at CDW, with our board. And it is thorough. But the important thing I tell the team is that's only one step in the process. It's only relevant if then when we make decisions about executive moves and leadership development, if we use the work that we did in the plan. It doesn't do us any good just to have the plan and be thorough until we execute. And I think what happens is, like I said, we now have this rhythm of the business. And when there's a job opening, people know that they're going to have expected to come present the TRP candidates on the list. And so there's none of this, well, I want to bring in, Freddie Joe because I know Freddie Joe. That doesn't work. It's not anymore.
David, do you have a similar process or something unique about yours?
I would say Discover is fortunate to have a very long-term inclusive culture. And I think about more than 15 years ago, we had more than 30% of our most senior leaders were women. And especially at that time, that was probably double what financial services was. And, I kind of felt that, well, it will just naturally trend towards 50% or what have you over time. And that really hasn't happened. And so I would say in recent years, we've started putting in place some additional programs and some of the HR processes, including including diverse lists, whether internal promotions or external. Some of the programs we've already talked about, and putting in more mentoring and having senior leaders like Diane mentoring and being role models to women who are earlier in their career. But we almost felt like the culture was critical but not sufficient, so we're having to do more and more. Sometimes I think things happen that take a long time. I think one reason it's so hard to change the numbers is there are no quick fixes. And we promoted a woman named Julie Loger into Chief Marketing Officer last year, and so she's now one of the top 10 leaders of the company, been very successful, and promoted to Executive Vice President a year in. But when I can remember over 15 years ago, Julie was a vice president in marketing, and she was having a child. She was going to leave the company for a few years because she had an officer position and so on. There was a second woman at the same time, also a vice president, who was in the same position. And the two of them ended up job sharing one VP position at that time. And it was controversial at the time because we were owned by another company. There was a limited number of vice president slots. And so we were kind of having to use two of those for one. And could you really at that level job share? But we made that work. And Julie wouldn't be in a position today to have stayed on that track and been promoted to the most senior levels of the company had that not happened over 15 years ago. And I think we don't do enough of that. And it's sometimes it's not the formal processes. I think it's the informal things and thinking outside of the box, being flexible, figuring out how to invest in younger leaders to keep them on the track. And then it may pay off years later for the person and the organization.
Yeah, that's a great story. It brings to mind the fact that we all know that we can have a robust we can have a great pipeline, but there's a lot of leakiness in the pipeline sometimes, and that's clearly a story of how you help to avoid that sort of thing. Do you have any similar thoughts about that?
I think people, I think today, not just women, but, they are much more likely if they're not if they don't feel fulfilled in a place to go someplace else. It wasn't that way necessarily when I started. It was I remember when I left a company after 20 years, I thought my dad was going to have a heart attack. Like, what the heck are you doing? So I tend to think of it as this perspective. People will stay if they really feel wanted, fulfilled, compensated fairly, and have a long-term career. And so it's my job to create that environment. And one of the things that I think Chris would, I hope she would agree with this, is I find sometimes people like to use work as an excuse for not being focused on their family. And I've seen my peers do it. They'll say, well, I'm so busy, I can't do this. And I think that is a cop-out. And so what I tell these guys is, look, if I ever hear of something going on, whether it was Chris's daughter in a dance contest or Chris Roser's daughter in a softball tournament, and you're not there, we're going to have a bad day, right? Because that is a priority, and you can find a way, we can all find a way, but what happens is I think people have to know that they're working in an environment where that's okay, that that's preferred. We want people to be able to do that, and I think that's in part how you keep people in places.
Chris, you're a business leader as well, so can you just comment a little bit on things that you might do within your own organization to ensure that the pipeline remains robust?
Yeah, Gloria, it's interesting because I just took on this new role, and so I actually have spent a lot of time reflecting on leadership and in particular talent development. And at this leadership offsite that Tom mentioned the other day, there was a stat quoted, and it was that for those people who work for managers who are good at growing talent, they perform 25% better than their peers. I mean, so if you just think about that, if you grow people who grow talent and the exponential impact of that investment, it's extraordinary. A couple of very specific things that I do and I've thought about and I think is very important is number one, knowing people in the organization deeply. So in the new role, we bought a company in the UK, and I was over there 13 times last year for at least a week each time. And I can tell you that I know every individual in that organization, and I actually know them pretty well at this point. And when I joined CDW, one of the things that I purposefully did was whenever I would come down to the downtown office, I would always send an email in advance to all the female sales managers, frankly, and say, would you like to grab lunch? And usually I'd go out with 6 people at a time. And those women now are managers and directors and even more senior than that. But it put me in a position of having a personal connection with those individuals and being able to, whether it was sponsor or vouch for, at least when we're in those talent review meetings that Tom talks about, know them personally. And I know that's very difficult, but I have found in my career that it's actually quite important. So that's one thing. The other thing that gets harder as your role gets bigger, but again, I think it's critical to the development of individuals, is in addition to the programs that we do a great job at CDW developing and continuously improving, frankly, is the notion of very specific one-to-one talent development. And it can't be complicated, but it's got to be clear. So for each of the folks that work with you, report to you, there really has to be a couple of things that you want them developing. They need to be written down, they need to be simple, and they need to be very clear how to do that. And I thought I'd give an example because I think there is a key in the how. So when you're growing talent, how somebody gets from A to B, what that roadmap is critically important. And a lot of times we can tend to say, well, you need more executive presence, or you need to seem more confident. And I was thinking of someone who works for me in the business capacity, and my team will tell you, and the folks who know me well know that I'm a real believer in strengths, lead with strengths. This individual was having struggles presenting up to executives, et cetera. And I started thinking about what's the issue here and what does he do well? And this is a person who is very instinctive when it comes to business and is really great in one-on-one conversation. So I sat down and we talked about this, and we talked about conversations and how much better they are when nobody is distracted. And that your PowerPoint is really just a facilitator to a conversation, which is what those presentations would be. And think about if your PowerPoint is distracting to the person who is trying to engage with you and hear the substance, what that means. So then how can we make it less distracting? How can I connect you? I'll connect you with somebody in finance who can help you scrub to make sure nobody's trying to figure out what's up on the screen when they should be listening and talking to you. So I think the two things, which are the personal connections across an organization, and then secondly, that one-to-one, what are the building blocks, but as importantly, how do I actually do what you're asking me to do?
Diane, you two lead a big business unit. I'm interested in your reflections, but also notice that you came up as a technology officer.
Yes.
And there's an area where we hear a lot about challenges in recruiting and retaining women. So can you just give us some reflections on that?
Yes. So, I was, I started out as an accountant, and I didn't really like that work too much. And at the time, no offense to any of the accountants in the room, I've been around a long time. So back in my early career, there wasn't a ton of automation. So it was a place where I could go that was kind of, the frontier. So took a little risk, went over there, and spent really most of my career coming up the technology ranks. So you might have noticed when we were introduced that, David and I had the same background. So I was at MBNA, David was at MBNA, and that's really how we met each other. I was serving him, he was my client. I had to give him some bad news one day, and our friendship was forever solidified because he knew that I would always tell him the truth. David was recruited away to go to Discover, called me up. I loved MBNA, and I had so much confidence in David's leadership that I said, okay, great, I'm coming. We had a lot of work to do in the early days of Discover, but it was a great challenge. And I truly love building. And, it is always interesting to me. I've been so fortunate in my career. I've managed to take some different steps, take a little risk. I've moved. I grew up in Miami. I went to work on the West Coast for a while, went to MBNA. And I would say, don't listen to this, David, but I thought I was taking a huge risk when I went to Discover because I was doing so well. And it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made. David took a big chance on me when he gave me a business to run. I think it was kind of a tester, which, if you think about all those informal leadership opportunities, look, we at Discover have great opportunities, structured programs, development profiles, all of that kind of good stuff, and that's foundational. But sometimes having those informal things really matter. And we encourage people in our company to move laterally a lot. Move around the company, pick up more skills, be more interesting to somebody who might want, to talk to you in the future. And I got that opportunity to run a small business, and I guess I did okay because then he gave me a bigger business to run. And if you look at our company now, we have 3 or 4 leaders of line business, and 2 are women, which I think is quite unique in a company, and it says a lot about how inclusive the culture is at Discover.
David, you mentioned numbers as you were talking too, and I just wonder, do you drive accountability against metrics in terms of driving your diversity?
Oh my gosh, you should be asking me that question.
Okay, I'll ask you.
She'll give you the real answer.
Oh my God, does
She
he
apparently
drive
wants to answer for you, so.
Yes, he drives accountability. I am living proof of that, for sure. Now you can, yes.
One of the things that prepared Diane to take a very different responsibility, and she runs the 3rd largest global payments network, and she's going to China and Russia and Middle East, wherever it is, and very different than what you were doing as Chief Technology Officer at Discover. But she, from the beginning, when you joined me from MBNA, you were involved in all parts of the strategy. So one of the things that our executive committee has been meeting weekly ever since we came, and we go through all the key things going in all parts of the business. So even though she was managing technology, she could be she was a great provider of technology for the most important thing because she was part of the strategy, but also because she was part of the strategy even before I gave you the business to run, you were intricately involved in the overall business, not just in a function. And I do think that that's when we talk about our value of collaboration, I think we really try to live that, and I think that helps people to be more prepared, more impactful, but also more prepared to take on something different, because it's not that they were just in some small silo. They were, working with other people and in a function that it may make it easier to move laterally.
David, just briefly outside, we were talking a little bit about merger integration and how important it was to take the task on quickly. So can you just talk a little bit about CDW's culture and values and how you integrate those in your environment?
Yeah, I would tell you, everybody I think says this when we took CDW public in 2013 again, trying to describe to potential investors that your culture is unique is they give you this look like, really, Richards? I mean, how many guys tell us that? But I really do believe that it is an incredible competitive advantage, the culture at CDW. And I say to people, I think the uniqueness of our culture starts with the fact that CDW coworkers take care of each other first. It is amazing. The times when they will do something without a directive coming out of any executive office, take out a checkbook and write a check because somebody is in trouble. And I tell people, I think the reason we take such great care of customers is because they take such great care of each other first. Now, having said that, I would tell you that I think, we have the CDW way, which is a list of all the things that are important, but truthfully, it all starts kind of through what I'll call the windshield, and that is what do people see leaders do? How do they watch them behave? How do they treat people? How do they respond in stressful situations? Do they, in fact, subject to this, walk the talk, so to speak? And we work really hard. I tell new coworkers coming into CDW, partially as a warning, but partially truth. And then the CDW coworkers know what I'm going to say here is, when you come into CDW, there are antibodies in the air. And they watch you for the first 6 months. They watch, are you humble? Do you listen? Are you arrogant? Do you try to understand this place before you begin to impact the organization? And if the first 6 months they say, yeah, pretty good, they let you go. If not, they attack. And I said, and I've seen people who are great, leaders come into a place like CDW and they just don't understand how important it is to treat people with respect. It is one of the most loveless, open companies. I've worked at 5 or 6 places I've ever been in my life. And it is, I think, the thing that is alluring to all of us and gives people the freedom to be who they want to be and lead the way they want to lead. And all I got to do is make sure I don't screw it up. That's kind of my job.
So Chris, it sounds like a great open culture. Do you think men and women react differently to different elements of the culture, or is it pretty homogeneous?
Well, I think, that's such a tough question, because I do honestly think where we are at CDW is, I hate to use the term homogeneous, but I do think that we create a consistency in how we think about our coworkers. As Tom just said, those characteristics apply to men, women across the board. And so what I would say is there is power in that there's power in respect. There's power in caring about your coworkers. And I think that my experience at CDW in any event is if you create those kinds of characteristics that everybody can appreciate. Now, they might exhibit themselves in different ways, and as a leader, you're going to lead in different ways, but nonetheless, that consistency creates expectation, and then everybody rises with that expectation. And I know sometimes that's not necessarily the answer people want to hear, which is no, there's a difference, and so we treat people differently. But I believe that actually coming back to a common core has been incredibly powerful, and is in large part why we are so diverse at this point in our history of the company.
Terrific. So David, what about Discover's culture?
I think that this overly generalizes, but areas like collaboration and respect, I mean, I tend to just generally, I mean, women tend to do really well in that. I don't have to deal with too much ego or what have you as much. And so I tend to think there tend to be some natural advantages, but I guess I've come to understand there are also disadvantages, or potential disadvantages. You talked about like executive presence or things like that. I think we've had to, me and others at Discover have had to understand that, well, there may be some biases the other way, or sometimes women may not be putting themselves forward as accepting of a potential opportunity for various reasons. And how do we embrace any differences and figure out how to keep giving opportunities to women as much as men. And so I think it's hard to generalize, and I guess I used to just think that, well, you just have to be fair with everyone and the same with everyone. But I think having some flexibility and some understanding and trying to understand differences of where people may be coming from, it's not, as I mentioned before, it's insufficient to just have an inclusive culture. You've actually have to, you kind of have to work at it.
So Diane, you're obviously leading a huge business unit within Discover. Are there any difference? Is there any particular way that you motivate employees based on differences? So do you try to use the same tactics with all, or are there any particular tactics that you vary?
Well, I think people are all, sort of different individuals. They respond differently. People want their differences to be acknowledged. So at least in my experience, I find what works the best is to, have first a personal connection with your team. And then you get to learn, who needs a lot of feedback, who likes to be left alone, who needs a little more help. So I think coming up with things that are more tailored to what the individual's needs are, at least it's worked a little bit better for me. I've been around the place probably for a long time. I think it's our 18th year now. Our culture is very inclusive. It's a really, really nice place to work. As I hear Tom talk about CDW, I know why you're on each other's, David's on your board, because your company sounds a lot like ours. Everyone in I love my colleagues. And it's just there's something wonderful about picking a culture that suits you personally. Discover has this nice, inclusive culture where you just people are nice. If you were going to take a survey say, well, what's the greatest thing about Discover? People would say the people of the company. And the people of the company really, they take care about each other. And so part of creating that connection and why people come and want to succeed and do well and serve clients is because they feel like they're being served well as individuals. And that is very, very powerful.
I think one of the things we have that we've held for that whole period of time is what we call the Discover values. It's the bottom of a Discover way, which has vision, mission, and so on. But it's first letter spells Discover. The first one's do the right thing, and there's innovation. Volunteerism is there, which is, I think a lot of companies may not have that, but I think, doing volunteer events and so on and doing things for the community really helps build that feeling of family to a great degree. But, I tell people, well, if you only work on one, do the right thing can cover a lot of ground. And I think having a set of values that is not just on the wall, but you reinforce in multiple ways, and that people see that the company is consistently making decisions based on it. And when they see our company lead the industry in doing things that eliminate fees or looks like would reduce income, but is the right thing for customers, then they say, hey, the company really is living its values. And then I think people can then rally around that and feel like, hey, I'm part of something, and it's a common belief system that I can really buy into.
It's terrific. So we've talked about leadership and how we develop it in the company and the culture, but there are so many external influences that we need to deal with every day in business. And I'm just wondering, Tom and David, is there particular leadership traits that you look for, you try to develop in your leaders in terms of being able to deal with this external environment that's constantly changing?
Well, one of the priorities that we have for our leaders is kind of the antithesis of that, truthfully. It starts out with focus on what you can control, right? Because organizations lose their way a lot by getting, kind of some shiny object over here and we go over there. So, but I think if you think about it, you're looking for leaders that kind of have a plan, and then they have the flexibility to adapt the plan based on things that change in the world that live around them. And I think just having this kind of innate flexibility and thinking about those, like for example, we can't change the U.S. economy. I'd love to change the U.S. economy, but it's not going to happen. And so the issue is, okay, how do we deal with it? And we got to accept it, not agonize over it. And so one of the things I look at when I look at people for the executive committee is how well do they adapt when things don't go as planned? How do they adapt? Are they flatliners, which is my term for people that don't bounce all over the place emotionally? They're just kind of focused on the task at hand. And I mean, here's a great example, right? She's got running an organization in the UK. She's running another organization in Canada. You certainly have different things going on in the world, and her ability to kind of absorb that and kind of continue on the path, I think, is a great example of the kind of leaders we're looking for.
Terrific. And David, how about you?
No, I
You
agree with Tom.
Is there anything, Chris and Diane, in your own organizations, as you look at bringing people up and the fact that we do live in a world that there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty these days, is there anything that you do in particular to try and both find the right people and then develop those who don't necessarily have those skill sets?
Well, I would just echo again what Tom said here. We do talk about a lot controlling what you can control, and the things that come to my mind when I think about my team and work on specific skills to develop are things like preparedness. You can't control certain things, but you can certainly educate yourself and be very, very aware so that you are anticipating or very capable of reacting. Agility, adaptability, I think is the word that Tom used. But the ability to be agile means you are prepared and you are very familiar with what's going on. I think of one thing in particular, which is the notion of, and this is, Diane, you said something like this, the notion of creating an environment where people really want to put issues or problems on the table and raise them very early. I mean, in many of my meetings, people will start talking about all the good stuff. I said, okay, 10 minutes on the good stuff, and now let's just talk about where there are challenges, where there are obstacles, because we've got all of us together now. It's a great opportunity to attack those. So if there's one thing I would say, I think that notion of putting things on the table early and not being scared to take the risk, as some would see it, and identify issues is really critical to being able to adapt and therefore, control what you can, but be ready for what you can't.
Diane?
No, and look, our business is very, very competitive. We are in a competitive consumer credit business, but we're also on my side of the business up against, Visa, MasterCard, which are way bigger. And so keeping your team, focused on the right things and motivated in an environment where success is, a little harder sometimes to achieve is kind of in some ways a great motivator because we're scrappy and we're out there changing the world. But, it does take special individuals that you have to select that can really sustain and perform well in an environment that really does, sort of test you every day. I think having the right, sort of team focus really makes all of that worthwhile. It's just part of what you do every day.
And as kind of Diane referenced earlier, there's great value people, someone who will tell you what you don't want to hear, but maybe need to.
Yes.
And I think that you know, I can relate to the people tend to just want to talk about the good stuff, and you need to have the right balance. And to some degree, it's about what are the problems, how do we help solve the problems.
Gloria, one of the things, a theme that I've heard, and I think even Liz started with it, is this notion of risk-taking and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone. And those are things that are so critically important to exceptional results. I think it's really important that your team knows you've got their back. And I remember, Tom, in your first meeting when you became CEO with the EC, he said something I thought was really powerful, which is, when we win, it's we. When we lose, it's me. As a leader, you have to think that way. It's a team that wins, but your team needs to know that it's okay to take risks. It's okay to be scared about what they're doing. It's okay to make mistakes, because those become the guideposts by which you then move forward. But as a leader, you really have to have them back, and they need to feel that with every ounce of their body.
Great. Well, as I'm going to ask one final question. I'll ask all four of you, and then we'll wrap it up and have questions from the audience. But do you think the leadership traits of today are the same leadership traits that people are going to need in the decade going forward? Are there new things that are going to be required of our leaders as we move ahead?
I think they will change. I think they'll evolve, and my rationale is I look at I've been working for 38 years now, and the traits of a leader when I started are dramatically different. I mean, I'll use David's word, collaboration. I mean, when I was a young guy, I don't think really people were too interested in collaborating. I can remember people saying, you know what, Richards, when we want your input, we'll ask for you, brother. Just kind of sit there and row the boat. And, today it's a lot different. And so I would expect, the amount of flexibility an executive is going to have going forward, I think will continue to just expand, because the workers, the environment, the technology, all those things are going to continue to change.
Chris?
Yeah, I would agree with Tom. I think what won't change is the power of leadership and the impact. And so, I think about seeing the playing field, and the playing field is always changing. You're always having to, you're setting up plays, but they never go quite as planned. So I think, the importance that organizations like Discover and CDW place on leadership development, and I think I mentioned earlier, continuous evolution, is going to be critical to the success in the future, because I do think leadership will continue to be as impactful.
I think things are changing a lot. I think, it's becoming more complex. There's more technology that's important to understand. There's more pressures, regulatory, what have you, the things that you didn't have to worry about in the past, you now need to understand and figure out how to be successful in that environment. Working remotely, much more cross-functional teams, as opposed to you just can't accomplish anything in your own silo. I mean, so social media, like how people communicate with one another, is changing very rapidly, and I think just the speed of change is changing rapidly, and I think that it's always been critical to know your customers, to be externally focused as well with competitors, but both consumers and your competitors are changing so much faster than they used to. So I think being nimble and being able to adapt to these new processes, and I guess the final thing I'd just say, it's a lot more, it's a lot different leading millennials, and so how do you keep them happy, and there may not be quite the same loyalty, and I've got one of my sons works at Google and one of my sons works at Facebook, and I'm like, we're pretty far from those. I'm really proud of my company, but we don't get the free food like they do.
The only thing, maybe my technology background and would sort of influence my response on this particular question, is that technology always changed, and I always had problems, and it didn't matter what technology we were implementing, we still had problems. And to me, leadership is just one of those things. There are core principles. Great leaders are always going to be great leaders. The environment is going to challenge you more, and it's going to really, I think, surface the really great leaders a lot faster. I don't think you're going to be able to hide in your office anymore and say, well, I'll get to that on another day. All that real-time kind of feedback really exposes you early on, which I guess is really a really good thing.